I'm Rose, 35 female. I'm a marketing consultant, and for the last 10 years, I've been what I thought was a happily married woman. My life was comfortable, predictable, and built around the man I loved, my husband, Richard. This is the story of how my dream anniversary trip to Italy turned into a nightmare of abandonment, and how, from the depths of betrayal, I orchestrated a revenge that dismantled my husband's entire life, while I built a new one he could never touch. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The brochure for the Amalfi Coast promised sapphire waters, pastel-colored villages clinging to cliffs, and the lingering scent of lemon groves. It was meant to be the backdrop for our 10th wedding anniversary, a celebration of a decade of what I believed was a partnership. I had imagined just the two of us, Richard and I, rediscovering the spark that had first brought us together over candlelit dinners and quiet walks along the shore. I had spent months planning it, curating a list of boutique hotels and intimate restaurants, each one a potential memory in the making. But my husband, Richard, had a different vision. A vision that, I would soon learn, didn't really include me at all. Richard was a successful financial advisor, a man who moved through the world with an unshakable confidence that often bordered on arrogance. He was charming, handsome, and knew how to command a room. In the early days, that confidence was magnetic. It made me feel safe, but over the years, it had curdled into something else, a casual dismissiveness. My work as a freelance marketing consultant, which allowed me the flexibility to support his demanding career and social life, was often referred to as my little hobby. He'd say it with a smile, patting my hand, but the condescension was always there, a subtle poison in our daily interactions. His friends were extensions of himself. Mark, his best man and self-appointed second-in-command, was a brash sales director who saw life as a series of conquests. Then there was Tom and Steve, two other guys from his college fraternity who had never quite outgrown their glory days. They were a pack, and whenever they were together, their collective ego sucked all the air out of the room. I was tolerated, the quiet wife who smiled politely at their crude jokes and fetched them another round of beers. "Babe, I have a fantastic idea," Richard had announced about a month before our departure. He draped his arm over my shoulder as I was finalizing a hotel booking in Positano. "Why don't we have Mark and the guys join us? We could rent a bigger villa, get a car. It'll be an epic celebration." I remember staring at the screen, the image of a romantic balcony for two blurring in front of my eyes. "But, Richard, I thought this was our anniversary trip. Just us." "It is, they'll just be there to celebrate with us," he'd reasoned, his tone so smooth it made my protest feel unreasonable. "Come on, Rose, it'll be more fun this way. Don't be a killjoy." And just like that, my romantic getaway for two was hijacked. It became a lad's trip, and I was relegated to the role of tag-along. The intimate villa was replaced with a sprawling, impersonal rental that echoed with the sounds of their loud laughter and sports commentary streaming from their iPads. My carefully planned itinerary of museum visits and cooking classes was tossed aside in favor of beach clubs with thumping music and late-night bar crawls. The first few days in Italy were a study in microaggressions. While I was captivated by the ancient beauty of Rome, they were complaining about the price of beer. When I tried to share a historical fact I'd read about the Colosseum, Mark cut me off to tell a story about a wild night in Vegas. I felt increasingly invisible, a ghost at their feast. Richard, far from acting as a bridge between me and his friends, seemed to revel in their dynamic. He would throw a casual arm around me for a photo, a performative gesture for social media, before turning back to a conversation that pointedly excluded me. The plan to drive south to the Amalfi Coast was my last shred of hope. I thought that maybe the sheer beauty of the coastline would snap Richard out of his fraternity boy stupor. The drive itself was breathtaking, with winding roads carved into the cliffs and panoramic views of the sparkling Mediterranean. But the mood inside the car was anything but serene. The guys had a cooler of beer in the back, and their jokes grew louder and more obnoxious with every mile. It was Mark who pointed to a small side road. "Hey, Rich, your father-in-law said we should check out one of these little hilltop towns. See the real Italy, right?" My dad had mentioned that, encouraging us to get off the beaten path. Hearing it from Ma, RK felt like a jab. Richard, ever the leader, took the suggestion immediately. "Great idea, let's do it, a little adventure." He turned onto a narrow, cobblestoned road that snaked its way up a steep hill. The higher we climbed, the more isolated it felt. The charming, bustling coastal towns gave way to a quiet, almost forgotten world. We eventually pulled into the main piazza of a tiny village called Civitella. It was undeniably beautiful, like a postcard from a bygone era. Stone houses with terracotta roofs were clustered around a small, ancient-looking church. An elderly man sat on a bench, and a few cats sunbathed in the afternoon light. It was peaceful, but the silence was unnerving. My phone, I noticed, had lost all signal. We parked in front of the only sign of commercial life, a small cafe with a few wrought iron tables outside. "All right, team, let's grab an espresso," Richard announced, clapping his hands together. As we all got out of the car, Richard pulled me aside. His smile was dazzling, but his eyes were strangely distant. "Hey, you see that little church up there?" he said, pointing to the top of a stone staircase. "My guidebook says it has these incredible 14th century frescoes. You love that kind of stuff. Why don't you go take a look while we grab a table and order for everyone? I'll get you a cappuccino." For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of gratitude. It felt like the first time on the entire trip that he had considered my interests. It was a small gesture, but it was something. "Really? Okay, don't let them order me anything with dairy," I said, giving him a quick kiss. The kiss felt strange, a brief, cool press of his lips against mine. As I turned to walk away, I caught a glimpse of Mark over Richard's shoulder. He was leaning against the car, a sly, unreadable smirk on his face. I dismissed it as his usual smugness and started up the stone steps, my heart feeling a little lighter, foolishly optimistic that the trip was finally turning a corner. The air was warm, scented with jasmine, and as I climbed towards the church, I was completely oblivious to the fact that I was walking straight into the cruelest, most life-altering moment of my existence. The walk to the Chiesa di San Giovanni was a welcome reprieve. The stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and with each step upwards, the boorish noise of my husband and his friends faded, replaced by the gentle hum of bees and the distant chime of a bell. The church itself was a simple, beautiful structure of pale stone. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, the air immediately cool and hushed. The frescoes Richard had mentioned were indeed breathtaking. They depicted scenes from the life of a saint in faded, but still vibrant hues of ochre, blue, and gold. I traced their outlines with my eyes, lost in the artistry and the history that seemed to permeate the very walls of the building. I was an art history minor in college, a fact Richard usually forgot or dismissed, and this small moment of quiet contemplation felt like a gift. I took out my phone to take a few photos, remembering only after a few failed attempts that I had no service. It didn't matter. This moment was for me. I stayed for perhaps 20 minutes, maybe a little longer, soaking in the peace I had been craving for days. When I finally emerged, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, I felt refreshed, ready to face the rest of the day with a renewed sense of calm. I walked back down the steps, a genuine smile on my face for the first time on the trip, anticipating the cappuccino Richard had promised. But as I reached the bottom and stepped back into the piazza, the smile faltered. The cafe table, where I'd left them, was empty. My first thought was that they had moved inside to escape the heat. I peered through the glass door of the cafe, scanning the dark interior. No sign of them. A prickle of confusion, not yet alarm, went through me. I walked over to where we had parked the large rental van. The space was empty. The van was gone. My heart began to beat a little faster. Okay, I told myself, don't panic. They probably just had to move the car. This is a tiny village, parking is likely restricted. Maybe they found a spot around the corner and went to explore, assuming I'd be longer. It was a plausible explanation. Annoying but plausible, I walked over to our empty table. A single, small espresso cup sat on the saucer, a trace of dark liquid at the bottom. They hadn't even ordered my drink. The small kindness I thought Richard had shown me was a fiction. I sat down at the table to wait. The cafe owner, a stout man with a weary face, glanced at me from the doorway. I gave him a weak, hopeful smile. He just nodded slowly and went back inside. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the piazza. The initial annoyance was now curdling into a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I try. Ed my phone again. No signal, not a single bar. 20 minutes stretched into 45. The lone old man on the bench had gotten up and shuffled away. The cats had vanished. The village was growing quieter, settling into the evening. The knot in my stomach was now a cold, hard stone. They wouldn't just leave, not without telling me. What if there was an emergency? But who would they call? What could have happened? My mind raced through a dozen frantic scenarios, each one more unlikely than the last. An hour had now passed since I'd come down from the church. The humiliation was beginning to set in. I was a lone tourist, a spectacle for the few remaining locals. I could feel their eyes on me, their curious, pitying glances. I stood up and walked the small perimeter of the piazza, peering down the 2 narrow alleyways that led out of it, hoping to see the glint of our rental van. There was nothing. I had to do something. Swallowing my pride, I walked into the cafe. The owner was wiping down the counter. "Scusi," I began, my voice trembling slightly. My husband, mio marito, and friends, Amasai, my high school Italian, was failing me miserably. I resorted to English, speaking slowly as if he were a child. "I am looking for my husband. Big car, silver." I made a gesture with my hands to indicate a large vehicle. He just looked at me with a blank expression, shook his head, and said something in rapid, guttural Italian that I couldn't understand. He pointed to the door, then made a driving motion with his hands and pointed down the road leading out of the village. He was telling me they had left. The confirmation sent a wave of nausea through me. But why? Why would they leave me here? I took out my wallet. I had my credit card and about 50 euros. My main wallet, my passport, my laptop, my suitcase with all my clothes and toiletries, everything was in the van. I was stranded. As the sun finally disappeared behind the hills, plunging the village into a deep twilight, the horrifying truth settled over me not like a wave, but like a slow, creeping tide of ice. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. I remembered Richard's cool, dismissive kiss. I remembered Mark's smug, knowing smirk. This was intentional. A memory surfaced from years ago, a story Richard had told me, laughing until tears streamed down his face. It was about a prank they'd pulled on a fraternity pledge, driving him hours into the countryside and leaving him there with no money and no phone. They'd found it hilarious. A character-building experience, they'd called it. My legs felt weak. I stumbled back to the table outside and sank into the chair. This was a prank. A joke. My husband and his friends thought it would be funny to abandon me in a remote Italian village with no phone service and no way to contact them. They thought my fear, my humiliation, and my desperation would be entertaining. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a thoughtless act, it was a calculated one. They had chosen this place specifically for its isolation. They had created a pretense to get me out of the car. It was methodical, malicious. Tears I hadn't even realized were welling up began to stream down my face. I wasn't crying out of sadness or fear anymore. I was crying out of a profound, soul-crushing sense of betrayal. The man I had shared my life with for a decade, the man I had loved and supported, had looked me in the eyes, kissed me, and then drove away, leaving me utterly alone as the punchline to a joke. In that moment, sitting in the dark piazza of a town I didn't know, a terrible certainty washed over me. My marriage was not just broken, it had been a lie. Just as I was about to be completely consumed by a wave of despair, a soft voice cut through the darkness. "Signora, stai bene?" I looked up to see a woman standing by my table. She was perhaps in her mid-60s, with a kind, weathered face, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that held a deep, compassionate warmth. She was wiping her hands on an apron. It was the cafe owner's wife, I presumed. I couldn't find my voice, so I just shook my head, another tear tracing a path down my cheek. "You are alone," she said, her English heavily accented but clear. "Your friends, they go." She made the same driving gesture her husband had, but her expression wasn't blank, it was full of concern. "They left me," I whispered, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. She clicked her tongue in disapproval. "This is not good. Come," she said, gesturing with her head towards a doorway next to the cafe. "Not safe to stay here. You come with me. My name is Sophia." I was so emotionally exhausted that I didn't have the strength to protest. I numbly followed her through the doorway and up a narrow flight of stairs. We emerged into a small, immaculately clean apartment above the cafe. It smelled of garlic and fresh linen. It was the first real comfort I had. Felt in days. This was her home, and she was bringing a complete stranger into it. "You stay here tonight," she said, leading me to a small guest room with a simple bed and a crucifix on the wall. "Tomorrow, we think. Now you eat." She wouldn't take no for an answer. She sat me down at her kitchen table and placed a steaming bowl of pasta with a simple tomato and basil sauce in front of me. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. We ate in silence, and for the first time, I felt like a human being again, not just an abandoned piece of luggage. Sophia didn't ask questions or press for details. She just offered quiet, maternal comfort, a balm to my shattered spirit. After I ate, she showed me how to connect to her home Wi-Fi. "You call family," she said, patting my shoulder before leaving me to have some privacy. The moment the Wi-Fi signal connected, my phone buzzed violently, a cascade of delayed notifications flooding the screen. There were no missed calls, no frantic texts asking if I was okay. There was nothing from Richard, nothing from Mark. I opened my messaging app, my hands shaking. I fired off a series of furious texts. "Richard, where are you? You left me here, this isn't funny." And then, "I have no passport, no money. Call me immediately." I tried to call him, but the call went straight to voicemail. His phone was off. I tried Mark and the others. All of them had their phones turned off. I paced the small room, a wild mix of fury and anxiety coursing through me. I checked my email, social media, anything that might give me a clue. Nothing. Exhausted and defeated, I eventually fell into a restless sleep, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. I woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of a single notification chime from my phone. I scrambled to check it. It was a text message from Richard. My heart leaped with a desperate, pathetic flicker of hope that this was all a terrible mistake. But then I read the message, and that hope was extinguished forever. "See, told you you're too dependent. Hope you learn to be more adventurous. We're in Capri. Get a taxi and meet us tomorrow. LOL." I read it once, then twice. My blood ran cold. The casual cruelty, the condescension, the sheer lack of remorse. And that final LOL. It was like a punch to the gut. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't worried. He was laughing at me. He truly believed I was just some helpless doll he could leave on a shelf and pick up again whenever it suited him. He expected me to find a way to travel across a foreign country with no passport and no money and just show up. Probably with a funny story about my adventure for him and his friends to laugh at over dinner. I showed the message to Sophia, my hands trembling with rage. She squinted at the screen, and as she deciphered the English words, her kind face hardened. "Questo non è grave un uomo," she muttered under her breath. "This is not a man, this is a monster." Her validation was the spark that ignited the kindling of my anger into a full-blown inferno. The hurt and humiliation were still there, but now they were overshadowed by a cold, clear resolve. I was done. Done with being the punchline. Done with being dismissed. Done with him. "What do I do?" I asked Sophia, my voice steady for the first time. "First," she said, placing a cup of coffee in my hands, "you drink. Then you think, not with the heart, with the head." With my head clear and fueled by righteous fury, I began to think strategically. I needed information. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal. On a hunch, I opened the shared cloud drive we used for household documents and photos. I scrolled past the folders labeled vacations and taxes until I found one I'd never noticed before, titled simply, Project H. It was password protected, but Richard was a creature of habit. I tried our anniversary date. Nothing. I tried his mother's birthday. Nothing. Then I tried the name of his beloved boat, the Alibi. I was in. My heart pounded as I clicked open the folder. It was a digital Pandora's box. There were financial statements from bank accounts I never knew existed, with large, regular transfers from our joint account. There were emails between him and his lawyer discussing the creation of a shell corporation. There were property deeds for a sleek, modern condo in Miami, a place we had never discussed buying. He wasn't just hiding pocket money, he was systematically siphoning off our marital assets. Then I opened a subfolder labeled MISC. My breath caught in my throat. It was filled with photos, dozens of them. Richard smiling with his arm around a young, beautiful woman with long blonde hair. They were at fancy dinners on a ski trip in Aspen on his boat. This wasn't a casual fling. This was a parallel life. The timestamps on the photos went back over 2 years. The ski trip had happened when he was supposedly at a financial conference in Denver. The beau. At pictures were from weekends, when he claimed he was entertaining clients. The betrayal was absolute. The prank wasn't just a prank. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease of deceit and contempt. He had abandoned me in Italy because, to him, I was already gone. I was just an obstacle, a dead weight, as he'd referred to me in a sickening email exchange with Mark I found a moment later. Leaving me stranded was his way of getting me out of the picture for a few days so he could enjoy his vacation, probably with her flying in to join them in Capri. The thought made me physically ill. I sat there in Sophia's quiet kitchen, the Italian sun streaming through the window, and I felt the last vestiges of the woman I used to be, the accommodating, forgiving, quiet wife, burn away. In her place, someone new was being forged in the fires of betrayal. Someone who would not be getting a taxi to Capri. Someone who would not be crying or begging. Someone who was going to take everything he had tried to hide and use it to burn his world to the ground. The next few days were a blur of focused activity. The shock and grief were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but I channeled them into a singular, all-consuming purpose, building my case. Sophia's small apartment became my war room. She kept me supplied with a steady stream of strong coffee and homemade biscotti, moving around me with a quiet understanding that gave me the space I needed to work. She became my silent, steadfast ally, a guardian angel in an apron. My professional life as a marketing consultant had trained me to be meticulous, to gather data, analyze patterns, and build a compelling narrative. I now applied those skills to the deconstruction of my husband's life. I transformed from a grieving wife into a forensic investigator. Every evening, I would sit at Sophia's kitchen table with my phone and her old, slow laptop, diving deeper into the digital rabbit hole of Richard's deception. I started by systematically downloading every single file from the Project H folder onto a new, encrypted USB drive I bought from a small electronics shop in a neighboring town. Bank statements, emails, property deeds, photos, every piece of evidence was meticulously organized and backed up. I created a timeline, cross-referencing the secret bank transfers with his work calendar and the photos with his mistress. A clear pattern emerged. Every business trip, or boys' weekend, for the past 2 years corresponded with a significant withdrawal or a romantic getaway with the other woman. Using the social media tags in the photos, I quickly identified her. Her name was Tiffany, and she was a junior analyst at Richard's firm. Her public profile was a curated collage of luxury, much of which I now realized had been funded by my money. There she was, sipping champagne on my husband's boat, wearing a designer handbag he'd likely told me the company had gifted him for Christmas. The sheer audacity was staggering. He wasn't just cheating, he was flaunting it, confident in my ignorance. I realized the prank in Italy served a dual purpose. It wasn't just a cruel joke, it was a strategic move. He had pushed and prodded me for months, calling me anxious and needy whenever I questioned his late nights or frequent trips. By abandoning me, he was creating a scenario designed to provoke a hysterical reaction. He likely expected me to have a public meltdown, to call the police, to make a scene. He would then use that instability against me in the divorce proceedings he was clearly planning, painting me as an unhinged, overly emotional woman who couldn't handle a little joke. It was gaslighting of the most insidious kind. He wasn't just trying to leave me, he was trying to utterly discredit me in the process. But I refused to give him that satisfaction. My silence was now my most powerful weapon. I didn't respond to his increasingly agitated texts, which had now shifted from arrogant commands to feigned concern. "Rose, where are you? I'm starting to get seriously worried," one read. "Please just call me. We can work this out." The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. My greatest challenge was the logistical one. I was a woman without a passport in a foreign country. I needed legal help, not just any lawyer, but someone who could handle a complex, international divorce case involving hidden assets and emotional abuse. This was far beyond the scope of a simple family lawyer back home. It was Sophia who provided the solution. "My cousin, he lives in Rome," she told me one evening, seeing the look of frustration on my face. "His wife is English. She had a difficult divorce from an Italian man. She knows a lawyer, a woman, very strong. They say she is a shark, but a shark for the right people." The connection felt like a lifeline. Sophia made the call, explaining the situation in rapid, passionate Italian. An hour later, I had a name and a number. Isabella Rossi, a me. Land-based lawyer specializing in international family law. The next day, I had a video consultation scheduled. I set up the laptop in Sophia's guest room, my organized evidence files open on the desktop. When Isabella's face appeared on the screen, I saw a woman in her mid-40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, chic, cropped black hair, and an air of no-nonsense professionalism. She listened patiently as I laid out the entire story, from the hijacked anniversary trip to the cruel prank, to the discovery of the affair and the hidden financials. I presented my findings calmly and methodically, sharing my screen to show her the key pieces of evidence I had collected. When I finished, Isabella was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, a slow, grim smile spread across her face. "Signora," she began, her voice a precise, confident contralto, "your husband is an arrogant and foolish man. He has made two critical errors. First, he underestimated you. Second, he left a perfect digital trail of his crimes." She continued, "In Italy, and in our home state, the abandonment, the documented infidelity, and the fraudulent concealment of marital assets give us tremendous leverage. He thinks you are a helpless pawn he has trapped on the board. He has no idea that we are about to flip the entire table." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a surge of real power. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had a plan, and I had a formidable ally. Isabella laid out the next steps with military precision. "First, you do not, under any circumstances, contact him. Let him panic. His frantic messages are evidence of his guilty conscience. Second, we must address your legal status. I will arrange an appointment for you at the U.S. consulate in Naples. You will report your passport as stolen, which in essence it was, and apply for an emergency replacement. Third, while you are doing that, my team in the United States will be preparing the initial court filings. We will file for an emergency, ex parte injunction to freeze every account you have discovered. He will not be able to move a single dollar. We strike first, and we strike hard, before he even knows he is in a war." As the call ended, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was a path of my own choosing. Richard had intended to write a story in which I was the helpless, hysterical victim. He had no idea I was busy seizing the pen, preparing to write a completely different ending for him. One in which he was the fool, the villain, and ultimately, the loser. The journey to becoming a victor began with a car ride to Naples. Sophia, ever my guardian angel, refused to let me go alone. She insisted her son, Enzo, a kind man with his mother's warm eyes, drive me to the U.S. consulate. The city was a chaotic, vibrant contrast to the sleepy tranquility of Civitella. As Enzo navigated the bustling streets, I felt a flutter of the old anxiety return, the feeling of being small and lost. But I pushed it down, focusing on Isabella's instructions, which I had written down on a piece of paper and clutched in my hand like a rosary. At the consulate, I told my story to a compassionate official, carefully editing out the part about the prank being intentional. I simply stated that my bag, containing my passport and belongings, had been in a vehicle that was stolen while I was briefly away from it. It was a version of the truth, and it was enough. With the police report number Isabella's Italian associate had helped me file online, the process was surprisingly smooth. I walked out a few hours later with a temporary passport, a document that felt less like a ticket home and more like a declaration of independence. With Isabella's guidance, my next move was to secure my own finances. From a small internet cafe in Naples, I opened a new bank account in my name only, routing my freelance income to it and transferring half of the funds from our main joint checking account. A move Isabella assured me was my legal right. It was a preemptive strike, ensuring I wouldn't be left penniless when the war began. While I was taking these first crucial steps in Italy, Isabella's team in the U.S. was moving with breathtaking speed. They worked in secret, compiling the evidence I had provided into an ironclad legal petition. They filed it with the court, and because of the overwhelming proof of financial fraud and the risk that Richard would dissipate the assets if he were alerted, the judge granted the temporary injunction without his presence. On a Tuesday morning, while Richard was likely lounging by a pool in Capri, complaining about my disappearance, a court order was silently descending upon his financial empire, freezing him out of the very wealth he had stolen to build it. I didn't return to the U.S. immediately. Isabella advised against it, and honestly, I had no desire to go back to the life I once knew. The house, the friends, the entire social structure felt tainted. Instead, I returned to Civitella, to Sophia's B&B. It had become my sanctuary. To keep myself from obsessing over the legal battle brewing across the ocean, I poured my energy into helping Sophia. Her B&B, La Casa di Sofia, was charming but technologically in the dark ages. It had no website, no online booking system, and its only advertising was word of mouth. It was a marketing challenge I was uniquely equipped to handle. I started by taking professional quality photos of the rooms, the sun-drenched terrace, and Sophia's incredible cooking. I wrote compelling descriptions, not just of the B&B, but of the village itself, its history, its quiet charm, its authenticity. I built a simple, elegant website with a booking engine. I created social media pages, populating them with stories of life in Civitella, from the local market to the village festivals. It was invigorating work. For the first time in years, I felt my professional skills being valued. More than that, I felt a genuine sense of partnership with Sophia. We would spend evenings at her kitchen table, me with her laptop and her with a glass of red wine, as I explained marketing funnels and she explained the secret to her nana's ragu. I was learning to speak Italian, my vocabulary expanding beyond simple greetings into the language of food, friendship, and daily life. The villagers, who had initially eyed me with suspicion, now greeted me with warm smiles. They called me Rosa. I was no longer the abandoned tourist, I was part of their community. My work paid off. Within a few weeks, bookings for La Casa di Sofia started to pour in, first from Europe, then from America and Australia. Sophia was ecstatic, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and disbelief. I had taken her beloved home and shown it to the world. In helping her, I was healing myself. I was building something new and beautiful from the wreckage of my old life. Meanwhile, the silence from my end was clearly driving Richard insane. His text had evolved through several distinct stages. The initial arrogance, "Let me know when you're done with your little tantrum," had morphed into annoyed impatience. "Rose, this isn't funny anymore. The joke is over. Answer your phone." That was followed by a wave of gaslighting and blame, You're being incredibly selfish and immature. You've ruined the last half of our vacation." And finally, as the days turned into more than a week, a creeping, self-serving panic began to set in. "Okay, I'm actually worried now. Is everything all right? I'm sorry if the joke went too far. Please just let me know you're safe." I read each message with a detached sense of fascination. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he was getting worried. There was no true remorse, only a dawning fear that he had lost control of the situation and, more importantly, of me. He had no idea of the storm that was about to break. He was still playing his little game, oblivious to the fact that I was now on a completely different level, about to checkmate him from 5,000 miles away. As I sat on Sophia's terrace, watching the bookings for our little B&B fill up for the autumn season, I felt a profound sense of peace. He had left me with nothing, but I had found everything. The D-Day for my revenge was coordinated with the precision of a military operation. Isabella and I had timed it perfectly. Richard and his friends were scheduled to land at JFK on a Friday afternoon, filled with Tuscan sun and, undoubtedly, a sense of aggrieved self-importance. Richard likely had a speech prepared for me, a carefully crafted mix of feigned relief, stern lecturing, and a magnanimous forgiveness for my overreaction. He probably envisioned me waiting at home, either weeping with remorse or seething with a manageable, temporary anger. The reality I had prepared for him was so far removed from his arrogant assumptions that the thought of it gave me a grim, satisfying chill. On that Friday, I was not at our sterile, minimalist house in the suburbs. I was 5,000 miles away, sitting on Sophia's sun-drenched terrace, a glass of crisp Pinot Grigio in my hand. The B&B was bustling with its first international guests, a lovely couple from Canada who were raving about Sophia's cooking. The air smelled of rosemary and lavender. It was a scene of perfect tranquility, a stark contrast to the chaos I was about to unleash in Richard's life. As per Isabella's plan, a process server was waiting at our house. Richard, exhausted and jet-lagged, would have walked through the front door, dropped his bags, and called out my name. Instead, he would have been met with an unnerving silence. And then he would have noticed the changes. The large, expensive painting I had inherited from my grandmother was gone from the living room wall. The handcrafted bookshelves my father had built for us were empty. The antique silver tea, set from my mother, was missing from the sideboard. Anything of significant personal or monetary value that was legally mine had been professionally moved and stored weeks ago, an operation overseen by my brother. And then, sitting in the center of the polished marble kitchen island, he would have seen it. A single, pristine, cream-colored envelope. Inside that envelope, there was no letter from a broken-hearted wife. There was only the cold, hard machinery of the law. The first document on top was the summons for divorce, citing adultery and extreme cruelty. Beneath it was a copy of the court order, the ex parte injunction, with its stark legal language detailing the freeze on every single one of his known assets, including the secret accounts, the Shell Corporation, and the Miami condo. The order would have made it clear that he couldn't move, sell, or leverage a single cent of his ill-gotten wealth. To leave no room for doubt, tucked behind the legal documents was the piece de resistance, a glossy, high-resolution 8x10 photograph of him and Tiffany on his boat, his arms slung possessively around her, both of them grinning at the camera without a care in the world. It was the same photo I had found in his hidden folder, now brought into the harsh light of reality. The assault was multi-pronged. At the exact moment Richard was absorbing the implosion of his domestic life, another process server was walking into the sleek, high-rise office of Mark's sales firm. In front of his colleagues, Mark was served with a lawsuit for conspiracy to commit intentional infliction of emotional distress. The suit detailed his role in planning and executing the abandonment prank, framing it not as a joke, but as a malicious act intended to cause severe psychological harm. The other two friends, Tom and Steve, received certified letters from Isabella's firm at their homes, informing them that they were named as co-conspirators and should retain legal counsel immediately. The pack was being dismantled, one by one. the final blow was digital. An anonymous, untraceable email, sent by a specialized service hired by Isabella, was delivered to the head of human resources and the chief ethics officer at Richard's prestigious financial firm. The email contained no commentary. It simply attached the same 8x10 photo of Richard and his junior analyst mistress, along with screenshots of their email exchanges discussing his dead-weight wife and planning their rendezvous. It was a clear-cut case of an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate and a gross violation of the company's code of conduct. Back in Civitella, my phone, which had been on silent, lit up. Isabella's name flashed on the screen. I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It is done," she said, her voice calm and steady. "The dominoes are falling." I thanked her, my voice thick with emotion. After we hung up, I took a deep breath, and for the first time in weeks, I unblocked Richard's number. The flood of notifications was instantaneous and overwhelming. A stream of missed calls. And then, the texts started pouring in, a real-time log of his entire world unraveling. The first was pure disbelief. "What is this? What have you done?" Followed by rage. "You will not get away with this, Rose. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Then came the panicked realization as he undoubtedly called his bank. "They froze my accounts. What did you tell them? This is illegal." And then the pathetic, desperate pleading. "Rose, please, we can talk about this. There has been a misunderstanding. I love you. Please just call me." I read the messages, one after another, feeling not triumph, not joy, but a profound and liberating sense of detachment. This frantic, hysterical man was a stranger to me. The Richard I knew, the cool, confident, untouchable master of the universe, had vanished, replaced by this desperate creature trapped in a cage of his own making. I looked at his final, pleading text. I took a sip of my wine, watching the swallows dip and soar in the evening sky over the rolling Italian hills. Then, with a steady hand, I typed a single, final reply. A word he had taught me the true meaning of. LOL. Then I blocked his number again, for good this time. I turned off my phone, slid it into my purse, and rejoined the laughter and conversation on the terrace. The war was over. I had won. The fallout from my transatlantic surprise was swift and devastating for Richard. His life, so carefully constructed on a foundation of lies and arrogance, crumbled like a sandcastle against the tide. The divorce proceedings were not a battle, they were a surrender. Faced with irrefutable evidence of financial infidelity, adultery, and emotional cruelty, his legal team quickly advised him to settle. Isabella, my shark, was merciless. I received more than 70% of our total marital assets, including the full value of the hidden accounts and the Miami condo, which was immediately sold. He was forced to sell his PR. Esha's boat, the alibi, to cover his mounting legal fees. His professional life imploded with equal finality. The internal investigation at his firm was swift. The affair with a junior employee was a fatal breach of ethics, and he was terminated with cause, stripped of his unvested stock options and his hefty annual bonus. His reputation in the tight-knit financial community was shredded. No one wanted to hire the guy who was not only unethical, but also foolish enough to leave a digital roadmap of his own downfall. Mark didn't fare much better. The lawsuit, while unlikely to result in a massive payout, was a source of extreme professional and personal humiliation. His company, wary of the negative association, placed him on administrative leave. His wife, who had been a friend of mine, called me in tears after learning the full extent of his cruelty. Their marriage, already fragile, did not survive the scandal. The pact was officially broken. I, on the other hand, was flourishing. I never returned to the United States to live. I had found my home in the heart of Italy, in the small village that was supposed to be my prison but had instead become my liberation. I used a portion of my settlement to formally invest in Sophia's B&B, becoming her business partner. We didn't just run it, we transformed it. We bought the adjacent, crumbling building and spent the next year lovingly renovating it. We expanded from 3 rooms to 10, adding a professional kitchen, a beautiful dining terrace overlooking the valley, and a small garden where we grew our own vegetables and herbs. La Casa di Sofia became Villa Sofia, a boutique hotel that celebrated authentic Italian hospitality. My marketing efforts had given us a global reach, and we were soon booked out months in advance, hailed in travel blogs as a hidden gem, a perfect escape from the tourist traps of the coast. My life settled into a rhythm that was both peaceful and purposeful. My mornings were spent answering emails and managing our bookings. My afternoons were for helping Sophia in the garden or experimenting with new recipes, and my evenings were for sharing stories and laughter with our guests from all over the world. My Italian, once clumsy and hesitant, was now fluent, seasoned with the local dialect. The villagers of Civitella were no longer strangers. They were my friends, my community, my family. Sophia was my nana, and Zoe my protective older brother. About a year after the divorce was finalized, my brother came to visit, bringing the last of my personal effects from my old life. We sat on the terrace one evening, looking out at the fireflies dancing in the twilight. "You know," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "I've never seen you this happy, Rose, not even in the beginning with Richard." I knew he was right. The woman I had been with Richard was a muted, watered-down version of myself. I had tailored my personality to fit into his world, making myself smaller, quieter, and less demanding so as not to upset his fragile ego. I had convinced myself that his condescension was a form of affection and that my invisibility was a necessary sacrifice for the sake of his career. The woman I was now, she was the architect of her own life. She was a business owner, a friend, a fluent Italian speaker who could knead pasta dough with the best of them. She was respected and loved for who she was, not for whose wife she was. Richard had tried to teach me a lesson about being too dependent. The irony was that he had succeeded, just not in the way he intended. He taught me that depending on a man like him was a fool's errand. He taught me that my true strength wasn't something to be hidden but to be embraced. By leaving me stranded with nothing, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to discover that I was, and had always been, enough on my own. My revenge wasn't just in the court documents or the frozen bank accounts. The ultimate revenge was my happiness. It was the success of our hotel, the warmth of my new family, the genuine laughter that came so easily now. It was the beautiful, rich, and fulfilling life I had built not just without him, but because of him. He had wanted to show me the real Italy, and in the end, he had. He had led me straight to my own personal dolce vita, the sweet life, one he could never have imagined and could certainly never touch.